I sometimes say that it's these unbalanced people who become president, who become the greatest presidents. And I sometimes go on to say, when I'm talking about do you want to be president, because usually after I ask this question, okay, who wants to be president? A few people raise their hand and say, well, I got to tell you that in my study of the presidency, I've determined that the decision to announce your candidacy for presidency is prima facie evidence that you are neurotic or otherwise unbalanced in some way or other. Because, if you think about it for a minute, being president of the United States is perhaps the most daunting task that one can imagine. And there is no one who is really qualified for the job. If you consider everything that's necessary to master in terms of national politics, in terms of the effect of policies on individuals, in terms of the rhetorical skills you require, the ability to persuade people, not to mention all the stuff you're supposed to know about foreign leaders and foreign governments and all that. Are any of you viewers of Saturday Night Live? Okay, well there was a skit last week, I think it was last week, or maybe it was the week before, when it was making fun of the apparent, at least apparent to the writers of Saturday Night Live, bias in the national media between the two Democratic finalists, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And to show how this played out, there was this skit where there's Senator Clinton and Senator Obama. And somebody who's playing Tim Russert is asking questions. And so he says, Senator Clinton, being commander-in-chief as you want to be is one of the most challenging tasks that can confront any political leader. And a mastery of world affairs is probably very important. So I think you'll concede that these questions that I'm going to ask to you, to both the candidates, are fair enough. Senator Clinton, can you tell me who the Assistant Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs of Pakistan is? And Senator says, well, no, Tim, I can't. Well, the Assistant Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs of Pakistan is da-da-da-da-da-da. Senator Obama, can you tell me who the Assistant Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs for Pakistan is? Why, yes, Tim, it's da-da-da-da. And this goes on 3 or 4 times. Anyway, everybody got a good laugh. But the point is that being president requires a set of skills, requires a kind of preparation that nobody really has. And you hope for the best. And I tell my students, on the basis of what I've observed among people who run for president, and Gleaves was commenting this in his experience of Michigan politics, that the question isn't, are you prepared to be president? Are you going to be the best president one can imagine? It's not as though, will you be the perfect president? The question always comes down to, will you be a better president than those other people who are running? And this is why as soon as somebody announces, then other people start announcing and say, well, phew, I'm better than that guy. And so this is the comparison you make, and this is why people run for president. Because if you had to be the first one to announce, then you really must think a lot of yourself. But if once somebody else is announced, then, well, okay, most ambitious people in politics can persuade themselves, well, I'm better than that person, whoever that person might be. Anyway, Lyndon Johnson was convinced that he was the best qualified person in the United States to be president. And he had these towering ambitions. So towering that it's taken Robert Caro. You've had Caro here, right? He's been working on Lyndon Johnson, trying to fathom Lyndon Johnson's psyche for now 25 years or so he's been working on it. Anyway, Johnson wanted to be president, but he also understood that there was this implicit embargo against Southerners as president. So what's he going to do? Well, he did a couple of things. One thing that he did, he started early on in recognizing the fact that Texas is a southern state, but it's also a western state. And in fact, I live in Texas, right on the border between Texas as south and Texas as west. I live in Austin. Austin is on Interstate 35. Interstate 35 is particularly the dividing line between Texas as south and Texas as west. And the way you can tell this, there are various ways. One is that there are these rural roads in Texas. And east of I-35, The rural roads are all called farm-to-market roads. So it's FM 1341. West of I-35, same roads, they're all called ranch-to-market roads. You can also tell the split between, as if you go from Laredo in the south on 35, up north, I-35 splits between just about 30 miles north of Waco. And it splits into I-35E, the eastern branch, and I-35W, the western branch. The E branch goes to Dallas. The western branch goes to Fort Worth. Dallas is a city that was built on cotton. There is that annual bowl game that's played in Dallas. And you know what it's called? The Cotton Bowl. Fort Worth was built on cattle. In fact, Dallasites often call Fort Worth Cowtown as a pejorative. But you can see the distinction. Lyndon Johnson made a great deal of the distinction in his famous election campaign of 1948. Oh, this is also a reminder. In the South, between 1876, Reconstruction, so the end of Reconstruction, and the 1960s, you know what the important elections in the South were? They were always the Democratic primary elections. The Republican primary elections weren't important at all because the Republicans never won anything. And the general elections weren't important either because the Republicans never won anything. And so it was the Democratic primary that counted. Lyndon Johnson was campaigning for the Democratic nomination for the Senate in 1948. And he hired a helicopter to carry him around the state. Now this was in part because Texas is a big state, and if you want to cover the whole state, you got to get around fast. But also because very few people in Texas had ever seen a helicopter. And when Johnson's tornado, it was called, would come around, people would go just to see the helicopter. And Johnson had this trick, that when the helicopter was preparing to land, he would have the helicopter circle a few times over the town square. And in small towns in Texas, I don't know if you have this off the top of your head, how many counties are there in Michigan? Anybody know?
83.
83, okay. Texas has an inordinate number of counties. There are 254 counties in Texas. And every county, well nearly every county, has its county courthouse. In fact, and the county courthouses sit on the square in the middle of the county seat. And so Johnson would visit, I don't know, he didn't visit them all, but he visited lots of them. And his helicopter would circle around the town square. But before the helicopter landed, Johnson would throw his hat out the open window of the helicopter. And it was a particular kind of hat, because Johnson was trying to make a point. It was a Stetson. The Stetson is the classic cowboy hat of the West. Now, it wasn't really a cowboy hat. Stetson has these, they're much more sort of citified versions, but it's still a Western hat. This is what the rancher wears when he goes to town. And Johnson wanted to make sure everybody saw this hat. Whenever he was photographed, Johnson was aware of where the cameras were, and whenever the cameras were on, he had his hat in hand or on his head, because he wanted to make clear that he was one of those Texans from the West. There's a kid who got his start in Texas politics. Well, he was a young man at that point. Jake Pickle was his name. And he was on Johnson's staff. And his job was to go around and fetch the hat, because this was an expensive hat. And Pickle knew that if he didn't get the hat, he would lose his job. And Jake Pickle went on to claim Johnson's congressional seat. This was the old 10th district in Texas. Johnson had been congressman there, and Jake Pickle was congressman for years and years. And the Republicans, though, finally had their revenge when they gerrymandered the 10th district out of existence. So anyway, Johnson was making himself out to be a man of the West. He rose through the ranks in the Senate. Oh, by the way, this is the primary election that he won by 87 votes. And he acquired the sardonic nickname Landslide Lyndon, because it's pretty clear that a lot of those votes were stolen. Some of the votes from South Texas. All the voters signed in with the same handwriting. Anyway, Johnson won. He became Senate Majority Leader. And he began to figure out how he could break through the glass ceiling, because he knew all about this embargo on Southerners to be president.